I don't know if it's what they use to clean everything, but like, everything feels greasy. There's that handrails and keyboards, I don't know. Yeah. All right. All right, so a short review. Short review of last time on Monday, then we'll finish up chapter 4, then that'll be it for today. Sometime next week, either Monday or Wednesday, we're going to have a day where likely everybody will be coming to class. We won't meet in here, but we'll probably meet out on the football field or in the bleachers, and we're going to do an activity. So I'll let you know. I'll email everybody for that. That'll be basically the first assignment that we'll have. So either Monday or Wednesday. If we need to push it back to Friday, depending upon the weather, I think at least one of those 2 days, Monday or Wednesday, should be fine. But double check. So we should be able to spread out quite a bit too, even with everybody showing up. So yeah. Any questions from last time before we get going? A couple more online. Yeah. What's up? All right. From last time, we had the chart looking at carbohydrates versus fats as we get closer to exercise, maximal exercise intensity. It's going to be all carbohydrates that we're using. And anything below that, it's going to be a mixture. There is a certain period, certain intensity where it may get closer to 100% fats. So look at that. That's just based upon the percentage of VO2 there. Muscle control of glucose uptake. So we bring in. Oh, sorry guys, you can't see the tape. Thank you for letting me know. So I'll go back to that. There you go. That's what I talked about with the carbohydrates and fats. Sorry guys online. Muscle control glucose uptake. So using it for physical activity during the exercise. And part of this is also going to be the endocrine system helping to release insulin. And insulin then will help get the glucose inside of the cell so that we can use it for metabolic processes. Mostly aerobic processes where we're going to be using oxygen at the same time. Skeletal muscle physiology, the fiber characteristics, so the differences between type 1, type 2, and then even going further, looking at the type 2 muscle fibers. So type 2A, type 2X. Looking at the characteristics, how they're going to meet the requirements for certain physical activities, intensities, maybe what sports they're going to be used predominantly in, how to train them properly. Then the factors affecting development. Exercise intensity, the duration, intensity, the frequency as well, the duration of the training. The duration of training could be how long each single bout is, but also how long the actual training period lasted. Was it a week? Was it 10 weeks? Was it 10 years, maybe? Types of exercises that are selected. Which ones maybe work better for certain body parts? Arms versus legs, barbell versus dumbbell, free weights versus machines. Total amount of work that is performed. That can be the total calories that were burned. Could be the actual total weight that was moved, which is basically take the amount of weight times the reps times the sets, and you got the total work that was performed. It could also be converted into watts, wattage. Age and gender going to be a big component there, as well as genetics. Genetics is going to be a major component with any type of performance. Major determinant of what the ceiling is that you can get to. Fitness level, starting off fitness level, that's the big one. So somebody who is starting off at a low fitness level of strength and or aerobic conditioning is going to have the ability to increase more so than somebody who has already been trained. And that's for anaerobic or aerobic type of training, doesn't matter. Then the bone metabolism, bones are just like the muscles, they need stress placed upon them to maintain their strength. And any type of low gravity, such as space or bad nutrition, lack of physical activity, can then potentially cause osteoporosis, which is just low bone density. And left off here with the female athlete triad. So there's a low energy availability, usually associated with an eating disorder, bulimia or anorexia. And along with that, there's probably a lot of exercise that may be happening, not always, but a lot of times there is. And osteoporosis then can develop from that because the nutrients are not getting to the bones. And also, with the low nutrients along with a lot of exercise, they could have amenorrhea. And amenorrhea is actually defined as 3 skipped menstrual cycles, but it's basically a disruption in the menstrual cycle, or one that is just lacking, and it's all hormonal related. Those changes in the hormones also affect bone density. So the low energy as well as the amenorrhea then is going to be causing the osteoporosis. And luckily though, there is treatment for it. Get back to eumenorrhea or normal menstrual cycles, as well as optimal bone health and better dietary habits and exercise habits. Energy balance, weight control, so promoting overall good health, optimizing nutrient intakes for sports and athletics. Body weight control can be controlled or can be described by using certain energy balance equations. There's not just one. There are a few different ones, many different ones. A lot of them are based upon sex, age, body weight, activity level is also in there as well. It's still just an estimation. So even though there might be some actual real numbers associated with how much carbohydrates, fats, protein, and other nutrients somebody might need, it may need to be adjusted as they move along. Major goals promoting overall health, good health, heart health. Heart health tends to be one of the top concerns, but hopefully lack of disease risk, such as diabetes. And then also optimizing for performance in sports and athletics. So part of that is not only how much energy total they need, calories overall, but maybe how much protein a certain athlete might need, because that tends to be somewhat of a confusing nutrient. A lot of people think they need massive amounts of it when they don't necessarily need that much. They'll need some, but they don't need maybe nearly as much as what some magazines might say. And also looking at supplements. Who needs them? What could be beneficial? Any questions on that? Factors affecting intake and expenditure. First big one there, genetic profile. Genetic profile. And genetics plays a major role in determining a lot of things that happen in the body. How the body reacts, type of training you need, how long the training needs to be, how many type 1 muscle fibers do you have, type 2 muscle fibers. Is your body set up for more aerobic or anaerobic exercise? A lot of that is determined by your genetics. Socioeconomic status, good foods tend to be somewhat expensive. Good nutritious foods, not just good food, because some really good food is really, really cheap, but it's also really bad for you. Really good healthy food can be expensive at times. Not only is it expensive in the food itself, but a lot of times you're having to replenish a lot of the food quickly. Fruits, vegetables, they don't last for weeks at a time. So you're constantly having to go to the market to get food. Psychological state, this one can work kind of both ways. Some people, when they get stressed out or nervous, they'll overeat. They have maybe comfort foods. Most people's metabolism does slow down when they're really stressed, especially psychological stress. But some people tend to not eat at all. Like they're not hungry. And that can in fact affect fluid levels also, because they're maybe not drinking any fluids, water being an important one. Now they might drink alcohol. That could be a whole other issue. But the psychological state can affect the energy intake, physical activity, and exercise patterns, just overall how active they are throughout the day, throughout the week. And then availability and selection of macronutrient. Sorry. Macronutrient intake, and when we describe macronutrient, we're talking about carbs, fats, proteins. Those are the three big ones. So those are the ones we need in larger amounts. The availability of that is also affected by a couple different factors. Socioeconomic status can be a factor, but also where somebody lives. What is actually available. Also the work environment, your peers, people you work with, your family, all affecting energy intake and expenditure. Any questions? All right. Assessment of energy expenditure. So critical for promoting weight loss, or yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, you mentioned a little bit about protein intake. What would be like optimal?
Optimal. All right. So for you guys online, the question was, what is optimal intake for protein? There's my marker at. So most of the data shows even for athletes, you don't need a massive amount based upon your body mass. Let me explain. So for the average population, somewhere right around 0.8 grams of protein for every kilogram of body mass. Most recommendations for athletes, it is a little bit higher than the average population. Maybe 1.0 to say 1.5 grams per kilogram. Yes. Camera control. There we go. This is the average population. This is athletes. So 1 to 1.5 grams per kilogram. Again, yeah.
Is it true that muscle protein synthesis can be stimulated every 4 hours, or is that what it's
Can be stimulated every 4 hours?
Yeah.
Possibly, as long as you are stimulating it somehow, either by working out or, I mean, nutritional status might affect the way it's able to, I guess, be jump-started. I'm not sure if there's any nutrients that you ingest that just kind of jump-starts it. It almost feels like it needs to be some physical stimulus, like a training regimen or something. So, but I would imagine at least every 4 hours you can probably start it. Because as long as you're training, there's going to be some muscle damage, and that's going to cause a stimulation to build it up. So, yeah. I'd have to look a little bit more into that, specifically. There are times you maybe get a little bit higher protein. Some athletes have been known to benefit from maybe up to 2 grams per kilogram of body mass. There's actually a limit. And the limit isn't necessarily that it's dangerous, but 2.7 grams per kilogram. You see that a lot? So 2.7 grams per kilogram tends to be the limit in terms of benefit. Any of the studies that have looked at people ingesting more than 2.7 grams per kilogram of protein, there's no additional benefit than anything that's below that. They've tried up to 4 or 5 grams per kilogram. So, but if you're an athlete or you're training, 1 to 1.5, maybe up to 2 at most, you're still going to see the benefits from it. Some of this too, you start getting into some of the nitty-gritty of amino acids, and there's some amino acids that are maybe a little bit better than others. And that's where some of the protein supplements may actually be beneficial for some people, especially vegans. Yeah, go ahead.
When you're looking at those numbers, would it be better to take like body weight, or would it be better to do body weight?
Well, you get both. So, so if you weigh yourself in pounds, sorry, I'm going to erase this, guys. So if you weigh yourself in pounds, let's say 200 pounds, to get to kilograms, just divide it by 2.2, and it'll give you kilograms. If it's in kilograms and you want to get it back to pounds, just multiply it by 2.2. So as long as you have your weight, you can get it into kilograms. Well, let's actually figure this out. Where are we at? What is this? This 98 something? 200 divided by 2.2, 91. So we got 91 kilograms. So if we want to do 1.5 grams per kilogram, that would equal about 136 grams of protein. This individual, this 200-pound individual would want to take. To give you an idea of how much protein that is, the average egg white contains about 7 grams of protein. So that's a lot of eggs, but eggs probably aren't going to be the only thing that you eat. You may have some chicken or some other type of meat. It could be a protein supplement that you're getting. Even some plants are going to have some protein in it. Or if you're eating some nuts, peanuts, seeds, you're going to have protein in it. So Any questions on this? This is good stuff. This is stuff I like to do, extra stuff. We did it in the last class too. We'll get into a little bit more about nutritional stuff and talk, I guess, a little bit about this too here in a couple weeks, I think. Any other questions? I think, at least what used to be said for, if you look at some bodybuilding magazines, it'll say 4 to 5 grams per pound of body weight. So you're talking about maybe up to 1,000. Yeah. Now, if somebody is very massive, 260, 70 pounds, 12% body fat, they may be getting more than the average, 3,000 calories a day. But even then, it's still going to be a massive amount. This can change depending upon the total daily caloric intake. Michael Phelps famously was eating, 20,000 calories a day. He was probably getting well above this 1.5 because he was eating like a dozen or maybe 2 dozen eggs plus his chicken. And he had a bunch of other stuff there too that was probably getting him above this, but he was burning the calories, so it kind of equaled out. He was getting enough protein. Some of it he was probably using also for building muscle, building other tissues, and just immediate caloric output. So there's some variations there that could change these numbers, and it'd still be okay. Anyway, any questions? Good question. Environmental exercise physiology. Somebody asked online whether or not Group A or Group B was in class. I have no idea, to be honest. I know there's some confusion because of Labor Day, but it's just alternating each day. So if you're in class today, you should be online on Monday, and then we'll flip on Wednesday and then flip back on Friday. This could change if we all meet at the same day. So, but I'll email and make sure to clear everything up if that happens. So. All right. So, environmental exercise physiology. A lot of this is to ensure safety, but also performance in not only athletics, but job settings. There's a lot of jobs that are outside in the heat, humidity, could be the cold. Could also be some jobs that are in other types of environments that we don't normally think about. Most of us don't even, we never experience it, at least to an extreme extent, which would be hypergravity or microgravity. Microgravity would be the astronauts. Or no gravity at all, basically the astronauts. The hypergravity would be experienced by fighter pilots. So when they're banking around a turn in the jet, they're going to feel like they're much heavier than what they really are, because of the G-forces. That's going to cause some physiological disturbances in the body, the biggest one being the blood wants to pull down at the feet now. So there needs to be some sort of reaction to get that blood back up to the heart. They can wear suits that help with that, and they can have breathing techniques and contracting the leg muscles as well. So how do people react in these types of environments, and how, if any, responses then translate into adaptations over a certain period of time. Probably not going to adapt to that hypergravity unless it's very consistent throughout the entire day for years, I guess, days, weeks. High altitude, hypoxia, or low oxygen environments. So going up on a mountain, I guess it doesn't need to be a mountain, it just needs to be high elevation, above sea level. Doesn't really affect the body too much until we start getting into thousands of feet above sea level. 6,000, 7,000 feet, you're probably going to start to feel it. 8,000 to 10,000 feet, you're really going to start to feel it when you're exercising. Then once you start getting up to 12, 14, 15,000 feet, you're probably going to feel it even at rest. There are adaptations that can occur in some of these environments. The heat we'll adapt to, as long as we're exposed to it consistently for 8 to 12 days-ish. So almost 2 weeks, we should be adapted to the heat. That's one of the reasons why football teams tend to have 2 weeks of 2 days to get used to the heat. The other thing is too, training aspect of it. The humidity, that one's going to be a little bit more difficult to get used to, but that's kind of part of the heat adaptation that we can go through. High altitude, we can adapt to high altitude. That one takes about 3 to 4 weeks. It takes a little bit longer. And all you need to do is live at that altitude. And by living, I mean sleeping for 6 to 8 hours a night, yeah.
What they do is, if somebody has to go play in Denver, they leave it for several weeks. Is there a quick way to adapt?
I don't think there's any quick way to adapt. And that's one of the problems when some of the teams will, thinking of football, but even basketball too, it'll be affected. So the question was, excuse me, for those of you online, what do the teams do if they need to play in like Denver? And that's kind of a conundrum because usually they only have a week between games or maybe even a few days. I'm not sure what they can do. I know a lot of times they'll have oxygen, supplemental oxygen on the sidelines. That helps immediately, but while they're out in the field, that oxygen's already used up anyway. There are some training methods. Well, I'll say this, somebody who's already well-trained is going to have a better time and a better ability to perform well than somebody who's untrained. It also kind of depends upon the sport. More anaerobic sports sometimes are benefited. And I'm talking about anaerobic in that it's short bursts of, I don't know, a minute or two or less. Football can be maybe seen as one of those. There's an aerobic component to it, but it's not purely aerobic. So somebody that's trying to run long distance at altitude is going to have a very tough time if they're not trained. But somebody who's trying to run a 100-meter dash actually may improve their time because the air is a little thinner and the wind resistance isn't as much. So they may actually improve their time. Yeah. Oh, do you have a question? I'm not sure what, if anything, they can do other than if it's aerobic, they probably need at least a week or so at altitude just to maintain it. I think a lot of those teams try to get to Denver or somewhere like that quickly, like after their last game. That way they can have some type of adaptation. So, but yeah, all they need to do is be able to sleep at that altitude. Yeah.
So I know this is more common in like cycling. I don't know if like basketball or football players are doing, but they have like the hyperbaric chambers Yeah, like they sleep and it like sucks oxygen out, like they sleep in the tank and it sucks the oxygen out, so the whole time they're sleeping, their oxygen deprived.
Yeah, and that's actually one way that they could use it. So for those of you online, it was a basic comment about the hyperbaric chambers. There are chambers, and in fact, I think they're even, anybody can buy them now. Sometimes they're a little expensive. I use this for my dissertation. I used this chamber that was, it was probably like this big, this corner of the room over here. And we did just that. We sucked out the oxygen. It went from normal oxygen within the room was 21%. We brought it down to about 11%. We were simulating the oxygen level at Pikes Peak in Colorado, roughly 14,000 feet-ish, somewhere around there. So you can use a chamber. I think they sell them where they're just basically tents. And you sleep in this little tent and it sucks out the oxygen. I would imagine there's probably a lot of athletes that may have them, especially ones that may be traveling all across the country. And they may be able to afford them too. Because I know they've come down in price over the years. You know, they used to be tens of thousands of dollars. But now I think you can get them, I say cheap, but they're $3,000, maybe $4,000 just for an individualized tent that somebody can sleep in, or some type of chamber where it's sucking out the oxygen. And that's all they need to do. They just need to be able to sleep in that environment, and the adaptations will take place. Then the benefit of that is they can train at a high intensity. Then once they get outside of that, after they're done sleeping. The issue with trying to train at altitude is the intensity. You feel like you're at a higher intensity than what you really are. So if you're at 50% here at Wilmington, 50% of your maximal exercise, and you go to Pikes Peak, it's going to probably feel like you're working at about 80 or 85%, which is a significant difference. You're going to feel like you're working much harder than what you really are. So you're not going to be able to maximize the training intensity if you're trying to also train at that altitude. So you need to train at a low altitude. And there's actually a concept in environmental physiology known as live high, train low. So you're living at altitude, but you're also training at the same time at a lower altitude. So the living high will maximize your adaptations, and training at a lower altitude will maximize the intensity that you can train at. So a lot of research has gone into this. So again, optimizing the performance in those environments. One of the environments that we don't necessarily have an adaptation to, there may be something there small, but it's only seen in a certain group of people or certain groups of people, depending upon what their genetics are mostly. But cold. We don't adapt well to the cold. We do tend to adapt to do things in the cold to keep our body heat up, which is wear more clothes, maybe cuddle up, maybe build a fire, drink warm fluids, go inside, do something, or even just walk around. Do some type of physical activity to keep the body warm. But in terms of an adaptation to cold, there's really nothing there. Psychologically, we tend to feel better after a few weeks or a month than in really chilly conditions. But it's not really an adaptation, it's just more psychological than anything. And it's kind of the opposite once we, in the spring, once it starts getting warmer, and once you hit a 50 or 55 degree day, you're wearing shorts and a t-shirt, you're like, wow, man, this is good weather. And then when it's 90 degrees and you're feeling okay, you might be a little sweaty throughout the day. But if you would have went to that 90 degrees back in February, it may have felt a little different to you. So you were adapted to the heat, but you're not adapted to the cold environment. But the cold environment might just psychologically feel a little better to you after a while. When I lived in Texas for a few years, during the fall, when it got down in the low 60s, I mean, big winter coats were coming out, hoodies and caps, I mean, gloves, people with gloves all in 60 degrees. Yeah, so, and there I am in still shorts and a t-shirt. Like, I'm gonna go get a tan later. So, yeah. Had someone in the last class say that they lived in Alaska for a few years, and they said when it would get in the 30s and 40s, people would be wearing shorts, t-shirt, they'd be out sunbathing. So it's, yeah. Of course, they also said that, at least where they lived, it was negative 70 during the winter at times. So yeah, it's like almost instant frostbite. I don't know about that. So specifically the heat, factors affecting the exercise and the heat. Use some medications and any supplements. Some of that stuff, some of the supplements may actually dehydrate the body. Maybe cause heart rate fluctuations, blood pressure fluctuations, which can affect what's happening in the heat. Acclimatization to the environmental conditions. Acclimatization is basically just adapting to that climate. So that's the adaptation portion. So how quick that adaptation can occur. Hydration status, that's really the big one. If somebody's exercising in the heat and they're not replenishing their water, drinking fluids, they're going to start to have problems. The body can conserve water for a good amount of time, but at some point you're going to lose it, especially if you're sweating quite a bit. So you need to replace the water. Exercise intensity and the duration. The type and the amount of clothing that is worn. Not all clothing is created equal. Clothing that is able to wick away sweat and clothing that can dry quickly is going to be much, much better than clothing that just stays soaked. And excuse me. Although it is very cheap to produce, it is produced in massive amounts. In fact, when I lived in Texas, we kind of lived out in what we would call the country, which was basically thousands of acres of fields. And every other year it would be cotton. And we would get to see the ranchers make the cotton and put it in the big bales. So cotton is produced in large amounts, and it's very popular material to produce clothing, but it's not necessarily the best material. Even to keep you warm. I mean, it still has insulative properties. It's still good, but there's other better materials. Polyester being the best one, especially for the heat and the humidity, because it's able to wick away the sweat, and at the same time, if you have like 100% polyester, or at least mostly polyester shirt, that thing dries pretty quick when you're outside, unless you're continuously sweating. But as long as you have some type of breeze blowing, it tends to stay fairly dry. So clothing is a big thing. Environmental temperature and the humidity being that's the source of the heat a lot of times. But exercise is also a source of heat. In fact, a lot of the adaptations that we see with exercise in the heat is some of the same adaptations that we see with just exercise, just in general. The only one that you won't see is heart health and maybe kind of heart rate responses. So if you're outside every day for 2 weeks, you'll adapt to the heat. If you exercise for 2 weeks, you're going to adapt to that exercise. And some of those similar adaptations are going to be, you're going to actually start sweating a little earlier and more often to help cool the body. Your sweat is actually going to be a little more dilute, so you're not losing as much electrolytes with that. You are also going to have a better response, breathing rate and heart rate response to the heat, but also the same thing happens during exercise. And this is exercise in a neutral, thermo-neutral environment, 70-ish degrees, 65, 70 degrees. And then fitness level. Somebody starting off at a high fitness level is going to do much better in the heat than somebody who is untrained. Somebody who is unfit is going to have a much more difficult time exercising in the heat. Any questions on that? Factors affecting the cold, health status, age of the individual. The older you get, the worse we are at regulating body temperature in the cold. Maybe acclimatization to other environmental conditions, or to the environmental conditions. Some of that could be psychological. Anthropometric factors. Body composition actually plays a big role in the cold. The fatter somebody is, the more insulation they have. So that's one instance where being a little bigger might actually help. Then exercise intensity, the more intense it is, the more heat that's going to be generated, so the better the body will be able to stay warm. And again, here are the clothing that is worn, major factor. That polyester is also good in the cold. Especially exercise in the cold, because if it can wick away the sweat, that's a good thing in the cold, because if you have cold skin, is okay, you can deal with that, but cold, wet skin is going to be a little more difficult to deal with, because the transfer of heat on a dry surface versus a wet surface is drastically different. The amount of energy that is released through evaporation and wet skin or just water itself is much greater. So you're going to cool the body faster if you are soaked. That's why we sweat. So it's the whole reason. We're able to transfer the heat much more efficiently. But it's also why if you fall into not only cold water and then you get out and then the wind is blowing and now it's evaporating that cold, wet water that is now on you, your body temperature is going to drop significantly. But if you're just standing out in the cold, you probably deal with it for at least a little while. So you need to be able to stay dry in the cold. That's a big thing. And then, just the environmental conditions itself. Is it windy too? If it's just cold, you maybe deal with it. But if it's windy, and we get some windy days here, at times when it's like negative 10 degrees outside, one of those days where like they'll tell, you watch the news and they're like, don't be outside for more than 5 minutes with exposed skin, and you got a 15-minute walk to class. You're like, okay, so do I want to maybe get frostbite or do I want to go to class? Questions on that? And with that, was that for chapter 4. Yeah, 4. Okay, chapter 4, that was it. We will pick back up on Monday, maybe, with chapter 5. Again, I'm going to email you, let you know exactly what's going on for next week, when we're going to be doing an activity. The quiz for this will be available this evening, should be available this evening. Also, if you're having any problems with the quizzes, I'm going to start giving a little bit more time for the quizzes. There have been some comments, some feedback, some good feedback. This is the first time I've ever done the quizzes like this because it is the grade for the class. Before it was just kind of extra. So I want to make sure to keep it fair for everybody, that you can get it done, but also challenge you to make sure you still study a little bit before you go into it. So if you have any problems, just let me know. Any feedback. All right. You guys have a good weekend. See you guys. Bye. Great.